Here we go. That and that. Here we go. 3, 2, 1.
Boom, and welcome to the Big Honker Podcast, brought to you by Pacific Game Calls. I'm Jeff Stanfield with the world-famous Andy Shaver.
That's right. Excited about this one.
With us today from the University of Texas, El Paso, Dr. Phil Lavretsky.
Yep.
Did I get that right?
Just like Gretzky with a little bit of love in it.
There you go.
I'll be damned. I'm famous for screwing up the intros.
Yeah.
Even when that's the only thing I write down. Everything else I go from the hip on. When I write stuff down, I look like old John Fetterman up there trying to read a statement.
And then there's the first one. So like we said,
That's not politically incorrect. That's the dang truth. If you just seen him yesterday trying to read his opening statement, that was embarrassing for the whole country.
So
Dr. Phil.
The way that this came on, we had Brian Huber on not too long ago, and he was telling us, Jeff, in his infinite lack of wisdom, he was like, hey, why don't we just release a whole bunch of ducks? And, that'll help kind of offset some of the losses that we're seeing.
Let me rephrase
and then
how
Huber
this was
like,
said.
No, that's not going to work. Look at the East Coast mallard.
Here's what I said. I said, we are having places that we're having duck numbers crash. Pintail numbers are crashing.
Right.
I said, well, I don't understand why we haven't ever just done a program where we hatched and released into the wild. Now, you take it from here.
Who's taking it? Me?
Yeah, you take it from here.
So your question is the experiment that's been going on since 1920. Yeah, we have and continue to do what you're suggesting. And in my opinion, it is not working so great. So I don't know how much your listeners know about the history about stocking, supplemental, whatever you want to call it, of particularly greenheads in this country. But typically, let's just go back in time, pre-1920, greenheads in northeastern part of this country, part of North America, they were vagrants, right? So they were essentially a cinnamon teal is to that part of the country at this point. And around the 1915s or whatever, somebody had the idea that they'd like to, this is also where market hunting was occurring. Populations were really crashing as compared to now. And folks had the same idea you did. Let's get birds and let's release them. Let's populate some of the areas. And there's logs that they try to do that with American black ducks. So the East Coast particularly, right? So that's where like the big fancy places were in this country at this point, right? Most of America at that time was very much rural. And so folks in the Atlantic Flyway in the eastern part of the Flyway started to raise American black ducks and mallards. That didn't take very well, right? These are wild birds. It takes a while. It takes a good amount of breeding to get birds acclimated, properly adjusted, and outputting the way, we consider a good chicken farm would be. So what happened was some entities knew that the Europeans had been doing this successfully for some time, this being raising and releasing mallard ducks, and went and got some birds from Europe and brought them here, and they started propagating them. And they've been propagating them since the 1920s. So from about 1920, 1960s, it was almost 500,000 of these birds being released. So we call them captive reared birds, right? You're rearing birds that look like a mallard. It's got a green head and all these types of things, and you're releasing them. And so about 500,000 every single year. And then from then to today, even, best estimates from U.S. Fish and Wildlife in 2013 was about 250,000, with 210,000 still being in the Eastern Flyway. And so the dogmatic principle of why this is okay was that these birds were somehow trained to a pond and they got shot.
Mm.
Now, if they didn't get shot, they just stay there. And if they didn't stay there, they would definitely not survive. And if they did survive, they definitely not breed. And this is something that I was taught even, when I went to the University of California, Davis for my undergrad, and we knew about these issues, we knew about these releases, but we were generally taught this has no substance to our wild population. All right, let's fast forward to, I don't know, 10 years later after my undergrad, and I'm in the thick of things. I did my undergrad. I did it in genetics and wildlife conservation. I married those two for my PhD at Wright State University in Ohio. And that's where I went into the mallard group. If your listeners don't know, there's about 14 species of mallard-like ducks. We call that a successful radiation all around the world. Australia, New Zealand, Africa, Eurasia, North America, all have their own flavor of mallard-like ducks. Of course, the all-encompassing one is the mallard itself. It's got, at this point, worldwide distributions because of our put. Anyways, so at the time I was really looking at questions between American black ducks and mallards, where there was decades of concern that American black ducks were going extinct because of hybridization with mallards, meaning that mallards were breeding with black ducks to the extent that there are no black ducks today. And when we did this at a landscape level, hundreds of samples, both black ducks and mallards, what was happening at the time was that I was picking up this genetic signature on the landscape that didn't make sense. It wasn't black duck, and it wasn't wild mallard. And so we published a few of those stories, in 19, then it got to 20, and we went, I knew about the history of stalking, and I was like, man, I wonder if these things actually survived and bred. Because remember, the only reason I should find your genetics and your babies out there is if you're surviving and you're breeding. If you didn't survive and you don't breed, I shouldn't find your genetics on the landscape. And so we went and we got known game farm mallards from several different states. At this point, it's now 6 states in the continental U.S. and then several European countries for comparative purposes. And we've got a paper hopefully coming out looking at this global distribution where we include Hawaii, New Zealand, all these other places where these things have been released. Anyways, so what we did was we brought these in, but we also went back in time. We went to the Smithsonian and we got birds from 1860 to 1915, right? Before that big release. And so, this was as close to Jurassic Park as I could get at this point. And so I have to thank the hunters, the hunters who had before us and currently, and those that put their specimens in biological collections and biodiversity collections, because they're a time machine. Without them, I wouldn't have been able to do what I did. And essentially, in a nutshell, we did this for black ducks and we did this for mallards. And essentially, a black duck for 150 years ago is the same thing as a good black duck today. But a mallard in the West is the same thing as 150 years ago. But those things that are in the Atlantic Flyway and now pushing into the Mississippi Flyway are not the same thing. They have been genetically transformed, and then through having these game farm mallards, and we also had khaki Campbell, right? So I sampled some khaki Campbell that were swimming around with our Mexican ducks here in El Paso, and they are a proxy park duck, like an alternative domestic, and it is the game farm. It's the game farm mallard. And I have to make sure that everybody understands game farm mallard is just a nomenclature. It's a breed. It's like me saying Chihuahua or Husky or anything like that. This thing was bred for hunting purposes. As far as I know, it was King Charles II in 1650 first started the breeding propagation of wild birds in captivity for the purpose of hunting and shooting. So they wanted flightier birds, essentially, and that's what they got. 400 years later.
Okay, I've got a question while we're in the middle of this.
There you go.
All right. So you say did you say there's 14 different
14
subspecies of mallards?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
So if I go to Disney in Orlando and I see a mallard flying away and they have a bunch of them that in there, that duck is going to be a different mallard than the mallard I'm going to find in a North Dakota cornfield. And that's going to be a different duck that I'm going to find in Egypt.
What you're finding in Disney is simply a domestic variant of the mallard. So the mallard was one of the last successful domestications in human civilizations. And so when you go to Disney or you go to a park and you see all these fancy ducks and you see this thing that's like this small thing and kind of looks like a mallard, or this like huge fat thing, but it's all like, it's white, which is the Pekin duck, it's beige, which is the khaki Campbell. They all have their names, right? It's just like if you had a lab or a Chessie or a Chihuahua or a poodle. They were eventually, you can line them all up and say, well, their ancestor was the wolf. And in this case, the ancestor is a wild mallard. Those things are not species. They are simply products that we have created through time by picking and choosing colors and fanciness and meat production and egg production, just like we did with cows and sheep and anything else you can imagine. We essentially push those traits to, our liking. And that's what you're seeing in Disney. Now, Florida does have its unique mallard, which is the Florida mottle duck, right? That's a unique species that is adapted, diverged, specific to Floridians. It's a Floridian mallard.
Okay, that when I shoot, this is why I asked this question the other day, and I'm going to use the pintails example. If we collected wild pintail eggs,
yes,
in a situation where they were fixing to combine a wheat harvest, and they were going to kill the because that is what wipes out a lot of their nest. If I'm not correct,
yes.
If I'm wrong,
correct.
Okay, so
they're shitty nesters.
If we took those
bad spots,
if we took those eggs and we took them and incubated them, and then got them little, and as soon as they got big enough to be on their own, we let them go in a pothole region somewhere up there with other with wild pintails. That's still a wild pintail.
That's a wild pintail. That's right.
We could do that, right?
But wouldn't there would be some element of human contact with that, because you would have to feed it and water it until it was able to fend for itself. So then
potentially you imprint them. Now,
right.
We don't know, right? Waterfowl don't imprint like cranes do per se. So to the extent that like we do that and all of a sudden they're just urban birds, I don't know, right? There's only one way to find out. I don't know how they would respond, but I would imagine what you could do is once they're puffballs, you essentially donate them you go to a pothole where there's a female with already young, and you essentially brood amalgamate, which is a thing that happens in waterfowl, and you hope that she takes them and you hope they survive at least.
Well, even if they do, it would be better. Is what we're getting. Okay, now my next question is, I've been to Chickasha, Oklahoma, to the city park there, and there'll be 5,000 wild mallards that are there.
You sure they're wild?
Well, they're not. They're not there in the summertime. But during waterfowl season, they're there. They might. That's where they stay. There's a city park in Hobart that holds. Sometime I've seen 5,000-10,000 geese there. They just go there. That's a water source. So water's limited, and they use these areas. Well, I've seen these ducks at the city park in Chickasha before. I've seen these ducks won't decoy, and they know what the hell a decoy is, but they'll eat bread out of an old lady's hand. Yeah, and these are wild ducks. Now,
go ahead.
Explain how that is different than the duck at Disney. Other than I understand where you're talking about the genetics are different, and that's a man-made duck, but they got the same habits.
They've got the same habits. The Disney birds.
The Disney birds aren't leaving.
Well, let's just say that
they're not leaving. Yeah, so Disney birds, if you go there, they're a mixture of like Pekin duck, khaki Campbell, call duck, runners. You name it. They're a mixture of that. They're just like a hodgepodge, a mutt of domesticated things. Now, how game farm mallards are different is because we still bred them to fly to an extent, and generally look and act wild-ish, but they're not. What they do is have a high. Now we're learning with a whole bunch of work with. So I did all this genetics, and now we're trying to so it's like, Fish and Wildlife's like, great, this is happening. Does it really matter, right? This is your question. How are they mechanistically different? And so for the last 3 years, we essentially tried to catch up on 10 years of research. And now we've got birds with telemetry units looking at that exact question, right? Like, when you go to a park, what kind of mallard is that?
Mm-hmm.
And what we're finding is those that have more than 30% game farm or feral in them tend to have a high predisposition to urban settings. And now what we're learning is that these birds, again, there's this weird cutoff at about 30+%. What these birds cannot put fat content on. It seems that way. We physiologically change them, and we saw this. We had a study with Forbes Biological Station. By we, I mean Mike Schumer out of SUNY ESF, Brian Davis out of Mississippi State, and we partnered with Panola Aviaries, as well as Forbes Biological Station. We put birds in these feeding trials, and when we were done with feeding trials, we basically put them on Purina Chow. And the wild mallards would always put fat back on, but game farm mallards didn't. They just stayed this like 900 gram bird. What we've done essentially, in my mind, and we're further testing, is that we've taken a jumbo jet, we turned it into a fighter, and then we took the fuel away. So these birds cannot go what we expect, and now we have telemetry data that supports this, is that these birds can't move very long distances like migration. And when they try to do it, they have to have lots of stopovers. And what are they most accustomed to is what you would find in urban settings. And that leads to the point where we were doing these feeding trials, and game farm mallards, again, more than 40% game farm in them, they have 50% less efficiency at feeding on wild seeds. What this means is they take twice as long and twice as much time to eat wild seeds. We've essentially turned these birds that are filter feeders into pecking ducks. Mm-hmm. They peck. And so you're right. When that blizzard comes in, and if those birds can get to a park setting, that's where they're going to go, because that's where that's the only place that they can get calories from grandma feeding bread and corn, big kernels that they're used to in a domestic setting.
Well, these wild ducks, though, will fly and feed in a cornfield, a milo field. They're regular mallards, but they've chosen to roost in a city park.
So they must have that 30% cutoff that you were talking about.
Potentially. In Oklahoma, we only have like 10 birds. We just have like a subsample, so I can't tell you that. But I can't tell you exactly what Oklahoma looks like, but we have really great data on the Great Lakes birds, Atlantic Flyway, all throughout the Mississippi, and then like cohorts across the other flyways as a comparative. And that, at least for those regions, that's what we're seeing, is that there's portions of these populations that have tendencies that differ from the others.
Right. These ducks won't be there in this. These ducks won't be there in the summer, or they're just there for December and January. They are truly a wild duck. Now, they may be coming out of Cincinnati Zoo. I don't have a clue. But let me switch to geese now. The Canada goose is a very adaptive animal. The Canada goose and the mallard are both very adaptive. When I first got in the hunting business, which was over 30 years ago, we had greater geese in Knox County, Texas. We didn't have them in the southern end of Knox County hardly, but we had them in the middle of Knox County. Knox County is not a real big county, but we had them from my lodge, 15 miles north, we had them. But if you got south of me at all, you didn't see any graders at all. Well, we don't have any graders now, but we used to have a good, I'm going to say 10, 15,000 birds of big birds that were here, and you don't see them anymore. Why did those birds quit migrating? Did they all get adaptive now? Because also, I grew up in Wichita Falls. We didn't have any big geese. Now there's probably 5,000 big geese that live in Wichita Falls year round. Is that the same wild birds that we used to have migrate?
Essentially. I mean, that's essentially what it looks like, is that cohorts fell out of migration, and then their kids learned that they didn't have to migrate, and then their kids didn't migrate, and then eventually they just grew. And it's very much tied to the fact that snowpack's not as deep, as long. Golf courses are essentially, they're year round. Their food and their water are there year round. Why move?
Yeah.
And that's essentially what happened. And so you had this flip flop of, you have to migrate. I mean, they're huge birds, right? They can withstand high weather severity. They're one of the hardiest birds. And so it takes a lot to move a Canada goose. And now even if you did have bad snowfall, is it long? It's got to be longer than two weeks of like more than 1 foot. But then again, we're clearing out, golf courses, like I said, and you've got the sprinklers on the golf course water, so that way they don't freeze over. So everything's there. I mean, I see it too. And we were just in Colorado, and it was lots of snow, but there was lots of Canada geese because they cleared out a whole lake, and they cleared out the golf course there, and the geese were more than happy to be there. So that's really about geese adapting to their changing environment and not having to move. I mean, would you move if you didn't have to?
No, and I knew the answer. I thought that was the answer, but I wanted to know because 30 years ago we had a big number of big geese here, and you just don't see them no more, and that's why. And I don't hear nobody shooting. Even in Oklahoma, the big geese you shoot are all locals because they're banded locally.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this: I want you to put your I want you to pull your crystal ball out. In like 100 years, let's say, some arbitrary number, could we potentially run into a time where there is not a migration? Let's say the weather patterns stay warm, we're not getting as much snowfall. Is there a scenario in your mind where birds are just where they are?
Depending on the species, but yeah. So all of what we're seeing is that a lot of the even puddlers, those things that are supposed to be in the prairie potholes are expected to keep moving north for breeding, right? So they like the tundra is starting to open up early enough. There's water on the land. I mean, it looks like a prairie pothole essentially now, and so potentially it's really going from the migration might be simply going from the Yukon or the Northwest Territories to, the south of Saskatchewan or Alberta, just making those small hopscotches if they even need to do that. So other species like teal, the smaller ducks, I feel like it would have to be so drastic for them not to go because they essentially feel some wind and leave. I would say it's the 900 plus gram birds that, we don't know what they're going to do. That includes mallards. Yeah.
That's frightening because I mean, everything changes and I understand that, but that's truly scary that some of these bigger birds, and I'm assuming that you would put geese in that category also, just birds that a little bit hardier.
I mean, geese are already responding, right? So we see them respond. More and more of the proportion between those that migrate and those that don't migrate, it's getting wider, right? You keep seeing more and more of the local Canada geese than you do of migrators. I mean, this is a thing, especially in the Atlantic seaboard. Like that's why you've got a September hunt where you're shooting 5 birds, and then potentially a fall hunt where you've only got 1 or 2 that you can harvest. Yeah, I mean, is it? I don't know. Are we going to be here in 100 years, or are we going to be on Mars? I'm hoping most people go to Mars, and I get this place for myself.
Elon said, if there's duck hunting on Mars, I'd be for going.
Ain't no ducks.
We can take them. We'll be like, what was it, King Charles? That's what you said. He had the ducks for hunting. Like I'll be King Charles of Mars. I've got this, Jeff.
Could you imagine hunting in 1640?
Oh no! Like what? So what did it do? Is there any literature on how King Charles did this? What'd they do? Just come out with trapping nets?
No, it was just a single note. Their populations were going down. King Charles apparently was a big avid duck hunter. He wanted more ducks, so he requested his person to go out and take eggs and put it into incubation. Now, the first time the word game farm was ever written was 1890, also in England, and they were banding them and releasing them. So that's like essentially, they hunted whenever they wanted at that time, right? They shot whatever they wanted. There were no real rules besides whatever the king or whoever's in charge made up at that time. So I imagine it was quite interesting. But yeah, that's really, populations were declining in his area, and he did what everybody else wants to do, which is propagate them. Now I'm sure his lineages were robust, but the thing is and we learned this really quickly in fisheries and think about bobwhite pheasant. You could basically even 2 or 3 generations in the cage, and you've got a population that is very distinct from a wild population. They are no longer tied to the need or even have that capacity to sometimes migrate, both for fish and birds. In a cage, everybody wins, but in nature, they don't. And that's the problem. When you're putting those individuals that are less fit into the wild, you're mixing those gene pools, and then you're essentially reducing the fitness of your own wild population. That's essentially what we're seeing here in North America with the game farm releases. What we already know is and has occurred in Europe. So if you go to our European colleagues, France alone throws out about 3 million birds to have a fall flight.
Wow,
that's crazy.
And so this is the. And that is, you could tell me like, well, I don't know what's going to happen in North America. Sure, not yet. But the problem is that we have lots of case studies. Think about salmon fishing, right? If we stop stocking that, there are no salmon runs for probably a decade. Because what we've learned is that the salmon in captivity, their egg viability is less than 50%. That of a wild strain. They have less capacity to migrate and find their rivers because they don't know, right? They're bred in a tank for them. Same thing with bobwhite and pheasants. Even with bobwhite, we know that egg viability drops by 50% even after 2 or 3 generations in captivity. So these are real things, real issues, and then you're putting that kind of individual into the landscape. And usually that doesn't have a very good fit. And the best way that I could describe this is, let's say we all agree and we're like, oh, we'd like to have some wolves in this part of the town. But instead of using wolves, you used huskies because they kind of look like wolves. And that's what the game farm mallard is.
Okay, right. I'm going to change it up from mallards. I want to ask you, the carrier pigeon. I don't understand how the carrier pigeon become extinct. And I know I'm not real smart on this deal.
Passenger pigeon.
Passenger, not carrier. I'm sorry, passenger pigeon. Yeah. How did the passenger pigeon become extinct?
We shot them every single day by the thousands and hundreds of thousands. I mean, have enough bullets and you can drive anything to extinction. Yeah, I mean, you're shooting them year round. You're putting them on people put them on hats, ate them, did whatever they want. I mean, they blacked out the sky at the time. They were 300 million.
That's what everybody says, but how? I just don't understand.
How can
without a disease or something?
No, I mean the same question could be, how could you fish an ocean out? And we keep going, from one species, and we keep going to the bottom of the barrel as we keep fishing that out. Anything's possible at when your take is above maximum take level, right? You're constantly taking and taking those individuals out of the population. You're doing it during breeding season, out of breeding season. You're doing it year round. That's always going to push that population down. And I mean, bison. How did we do that? I mean, like I said, give a person enough bullets and you could wipe.
But we still have buffalo. I don't understand. What year did we wipe that? It was in the 1800s too, the passenger pigeon, right?
This says there was estimated 3 to 5 billion passenger pigeons at the time the Europeans. This is at the time the Europeans discovered America.
Yeah, so the last passenger pigeon died in captivity in 1913. Same thing happened to the heath hen. Yeah, what happened was we were 1 minute too late, essentially. Like, the only reason that there are bison is FDR essentially took what was left and created Yellowstone and threw them in there, right? And then essentially had gunners there to protect them, and that allowed them to grow. We couldn't do that. We tried to do that with I know that we put a bunch of them into captivity and tried to raise them, and it just didn't take. We were 1 minute too late.
I just the population of our country it just blows my mind.
Tells you how many that they were shooting.
That just blows my mind. But whenever I look at history and you see old Civil War movies and you see something, you never ever have anyone ever include a passenger pigeon on anything. Well, if people were eating that many of them, you'd think it would be a normal table fare for everybody.
Is that what it was? Were they using it for a cheap food source and easy food source, or were they a nuisance?
A lot of it was actually for hats.
Hats?
Hats. Women, they literally put like whole taxidermy pigeons on hats at the time.
Everybody must have had 5 hats.
And it was recreational. It was just, in fact, I think even the last, like some of the earliest outdoor life or some hunting magazines showed like, you go with your girlfriend and you go in the evening and you just like shoot. It's like going to Argentina for a dove hunt, and it's just like, just shoot. But they did it year round, right? Again, you hit them during breeding season and you hit them year in and year out, and you hit them that many times. I mean, everything eventually falls.
This lady's got like a dozen on her head. I pulled up a passenger.
There you go, see?
She's one of our problems.
She's got a chicken on there too, though. So like
it was crazy
the style in the early 1900s or whatever. Look at this. Like that girl's. I don't even know what that is, but
it's just hard to believe that we could wipe out a whole species
of 3 to 5 billion.
Yeah, that
birds.
just blows my mind that there's that many, because there's so many places back then that in the Midwest where there wasn't no people at. There wasn't hardly anybody living. And that just absolutely blows my mind.
I wonder how many dove there are. Is there any way how many dove are roaming around? Because like if you bring up Argentina, like right now you bring up Argentina and they're just.
We just did a paper on dove, and depending on the species, I mean, obviously, rock dove or pigeons. I think there's like 600 million of those. But I think it's 300 million mornings and about 75 million white wings right now.
So 10% of what
unknown
we had.
euros.
That's
10%.
10% of what that's just absolutely amazing to me.
I've never been to Argentina, but I've seen the videos, and I mean they're just running roughshod through these delicate birds. Is there a scenario? Could Argentina alone tip the scale for our dove population?
Not enough hunters.
Not enough go down there.
Hunters. That's the way we did it. The same thing with ducks, right? We can shoot right now one pintail.
Yes.
You can go to Mexico and hopefully you don't go above your like daily limit of 30, but you could technically shoot 30 pintail.
But we're still going to be at the 15% threshold of dying, regardless of whether they shoot 30 or shoot 1, right?
Yeah, correct.
What that's another question now. We were real close to losing our pintail in the United States.
For this hunting season?
We came real close, like within 300,000 or 400,000 birds.
Yeah. I don't want to be on that board next year.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough choice if we don't have something happen. But what's going to happen in Mexico? Are they not going to let them shoot them down there also? See, there you go. That was my question right there. Yeah. You answered it.
I can't answer. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, you did. You gave the answer that everybody knows, but that's what they're still going to be shooting them in Mexico. So if you want to shoot pintails, you better book a trip to Mexico next year or in 2 years.
Well, and like we were talking with Brian, that's his primary duck is the pintail. So like
pintail,
California is disproportionately pintail heavy. And that'll screw them.
The fat guy from Knox City, Texas is telling you right now, 24, 25, you will not be shooting pintails in the United States of America legally.
Do you think that's going to do anything to bring the numbers back, knowing what we know about the pintail?
Need to start stealing eggs.
I mean, their problem is where they nest.
The problem with the pintail is the way they nest. They are adapted to short grass prairie nesting. That's what winter wheat looks like when they're flying back. And unfortunately, we combine that, right? Midstream of their nesting. And yeah, that's not great. That being said, I think there's potential that some of those birds are now going to locations that we don't necessarily think about. I was in and this is where I'm going with this. I was in British Columbia, near the Yukon border for various reasons, and I was blown away. There was every puddle duck that out there: mallards, teal, pintail, gadwall, widgeon. Shouldn't have been there, but they're there in numbers. And this was in September. So the question is now: are some of these pintail now flying past those regions where we do count into areas we don't count? I'm not saying there isn't a population decline, but potentially there is a population decline, stabilization with shift. And that shift, if they are shifting further north where we don't count, then that will also appear as a decline where it might not be.
Right.
So I think there's a lot more there to look at, but potentially if we look further north into more tundra-like habitat, including in Alaska, we may recover some of those numbers, maybe.
The snow that the Dakotas have had this spring has got to have a big effect in helping our duck factories this year.
I would imagine so.
And that might save us. But if the trend is going, we won't be shooting pintails in a couple of years probably. But didn't we close canvasback season in the 80s for a couple of years too?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what I was thinking when I was a kid. You couldn't shoot canvasback for a couple of years, which we didn't shoot very many canvasbacks. But the pintail numbers are going to affect a lot of people.
Yeah, that's a bird that's going to affect a lot of people. Yeah.
I've scoped out I've been scoping out your Twitter. The 3D printing that you guys are doing, that is fascinating stuff. Like you one of your tweets is you think the original early mallard duck head. Like that's fascinating. How do we even spit that out?
So we have, so a lot of this work where we're looking into finds. So I kind of mentioned that what we've done to mallards in captivity is we've turned them into this pecking duck. Essentially, they're stubbier, fatter bills, and their lamella, which is their teeth or the comb-like teeth that they use for filter feeding, have been transformed. They're wider spaced. So essentially all of this is dictating that they no longer can feed efficiently, which is what we found in our diet analyses. They essentially, when they go to filter wild seeds. So again, if DU or somebody goes and builds, takes a golf course, turns it into a beautiful wetland with wild seeds and all this good stuff, you've actually decreased the carrying capacity for that type of duck, because that duck was better on a golf course than it was on wild seed. And so what we're doing with that is we're using 3D imaging now to look at really fine scale imagery of these birds. And we're doing this across all these. We went back to the Smithsonian. We actually partnered with 27 national museums to get over 800 historical mallards from across space and time.
Wow.
And essentially, in a year or so, what I'm hoping to provide everybody is a flip book of what happened in this country, not only genetically, but also what we've done to the wild mallard's bill, right? Their ability to, the thing that allows them to feed, which is the thing that allows them to survive, breed, has immediate implications for their life history. And how that changes across the landscape in North America. And so one of the things that we're able to do is we can take those CADs, those 3D images, and we can put it into a 3D printer and get these like cool Terminator, duck heads. And so the duck head that we printed that day is actually a bird from the Smithsonian from like 15 or something like that. So we're using that to teach people and to look at fine scale detail so that they could look at fine scale detail of our beloved ducks.
So their bill is becoming, their whole body is becoming short and stubbier, or just their bill?
Their bill is becoming shorter or stubbier. Their legs, their tarsi, are becoming longer. And whenever we see that in a species, that is where we always see they become more land driven. So they're becoming walkers. And this makes perfect sense. Imagine if you had a cage and you walk up from 1650 to today, and you throw a bunch of corn or you throw a bunch of milo or whatever seeds you've got. What the best duck is the one that can run really quick and peck as quickly. Basically, a chicken. If we could just have a chicken duck, that's the best thing in a cage. And that is exactly, I didn't actually expect us to have transformed the mallard into this thing, but it seems like we have. On top of it, what we're learning is that the wings are no longer so everything's basically disproportionate, right?
Yeah.
The body length is actually about the same as a wild mallard, but it's almost 300 to 400 grams lighter. And we talked about the fact they don't put fat on. Don't know why. So they're physiologically limited. But then on top of it, we shortened the bill, lengthened the tarsus, and shortened the wings. So essentially, we've made a quote unquote flightier bird that can only fly for a few minutes at speed and then basically needs to refuel.
Right.
And but for us, that's great. You essentially have a gadwall widgeon mallard like thing that you get to shoot. It's like a little bit more sportier, I guess.
But so they are not bred to migrate because they don't have that fat content. They're only good for short little bursts.
That's right. So, I mean, that migration, they haven't migrated in 400 years, and now we're putting them on the landscape, and that's the telemetry units are showing us that things that have more than 40% of this feral genetics, they tend to do these random walks, have very close associations with urban settings, and make very short, movement patterns, right? They can't. And so you can imagine a freak storm in New York, in the Great Lakes, and you got this bird that can't refuel and it can't go very far. And you can imagine what that does to the population. Now, the more important part is what we've learned about the hens or the females. Not only are the females the worst at feeding efficiency, game farm females, but they also rarely, if ever, actually create a nest. And if they create a nest, they still do not lay their eggs in there. And if they do, they essentially almost always abandon them. And so you've got a bird that essentially, again, is a chicken. This is what we want, right? We just want them to poop out eggs. We put them into incubators. We're all good to go.
Right.
And that's what we bred their maternal instincts out of them. It seems we're doing more work, more research. But when we had all these birds in captivity, you could walk into a paddock, a pen, and you would know what that bird is because the egg is either on the ground or that bird doesn't want to lay eggs because it's wild and it's stressed out. Right. And so our wild birds always created a nest, even sometimes sat in the nest, but rarely ever actually laid eggs because they're in a stress situation. That's what we expect a wild bird to do. But these guys, game farm mallards, this is their setting. This is their this is their thing. So they just basically poop out eggs and don't incubate. Again, you've got a bird that it has to eat twice as long for twice as much time, doesn't put eggs and doesn't incubate them. So you can imagine what that could do to a population over 100 years.
How do we correct all this? Because it seems like we're on a path of almost no return.
Well, so the Atlantic Flyway, a lot of those parts, and there's a big disparity between birds out of Canada, which are almost always way more wild than things on the U.S. side. Mm-hmm. But the U.S. side of the Atlantic Flyway, if you go there and you look at a bird and you look at a mallard, you've got 2% chance right now that you're looking at a wild North American mallard.
Whoa.
So that's a problem. The other place that's a problem is the Great Lakes. And I'm not saying, at least it's an explanatory variable, but tell me the two places in North America that are showing population declines. Right. Those two places.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to get ahead of this thing to actually understand how could we explain the population declines based on the proportions of these types of birds on the landscape. And it seems to be explaining things really well. Hopefully we'll have a few papers on all that. But essentially in the Great Lakes region, we just put out a paper. It's about 35% of the Great Lakes birds on average are wild. So it's better as you go west, but it's getting over the last 10 years that I've been studying this, the Great Lakes area has been increasing in prevalence of these types of birds. So they've been decreasing in wild prevalence, and in the same exact time decreasing in population size. So we're trying to understand that. Now, if you go south of Tennessee, there's this weird thing that happens. We published another paper with Brian Davis and others. Over 90 to 93% of those birds in the Mississippi Alluvial Valley, of the lower Mississippi Alluvial Valley, are wild. Doesn't make any sense. But then when we started seeing where those tracks are coming from, they're coming from the Dakotas.
Right.
Almost all their birds are coming from the Dakotas. And when we do the genetics of the Dakotas, boom, wild. So there's this meta population dynamics going on that we're trying to understand. The Great Lakes birds appear to not want to go south of Tennessee. Mm-hmm. So potentially, the southern hunters of the lower Mississippi Alluvial Valley, when they're like, well, these birds aren't coming down anymore. That's actually true. So the Great Lakes probably had more wild birds that used to feed locations in Mississippi, in Louisiana, in Georgia that don't anymore, and that have a very almost perfect association that they have having game farm ancestry in them.
My mind is blown because I've always, since we've started this podcast, I've always said it was mostly weather related, but you're saying that it could be the fact that this game bird gene is in these birds and they're stopping north of Tennessee.
They don't, and they very quickly go back to urban settings. They go back to the Great Lakes. They'll just sit on parks. Essentially, they can't, right? And now we're understanding potentially why they can't go past Tennessee. They just can't fuel up.
Right.
They can't go further. And, again, physiologically, I have no idea why that's occurred, like why that even happened. Like, why can't they put fat? No clue, but they don't. And so their innate response. So there's obviously this innate response between Dakota birds and the Mississippi Alluvial Valley. Like, they are just like perfect, 1-to-1. That's their feeder. But what's happened is the Great Lakes has been transformed over this time, and less of those birds are responding to any sort of cue and are simply doing more or less random walks during migration. And so you're just not getting those. You're no longer getting, and I'm sure that was once a substantial number of birds that used to feed the southern hunters. Again, all hypotheses, we're still testing it, but potentially that explains the decline or perceived decline of a good proportion of birds that just don't code down there. Nope. And that's no longer related. I wouldn't say it's related to like ice eaters or anything like that. Yeah. It really does suggest, like, our research really suggests that these birds just don't want to, don't know, whatever it might be, to go there.
This is truly one of those things, like, it was a great idea, like kind of at a dinner party, like, hey, let's do this. But the ramifications, and there's been 10 things that nobody could have seen coming. Like, because absolutely. It was just, duck's a duck and it'll do duck things when it gets out into the wild, and I had to learn from others or whatever. But that's what fascinates me about so many things, because we think we have an answer on whatever the problem is, but we don't see the cascading effect of 50 to 100 years.
That's right.
There's 10 problems that we didn't even conceptualize when we had this idea.
Exactly. I mean, and I'm sure plenty of people would still come to me. It's like, no. Like, the Billy the duck never leaves the wetland until I shoot him. Yeah. But to be fair, if Billy never left, then I shouldn't find his genetics basically everywhere now. So over the 100 years, it's essentially a spigot. It's like this constant input, and best estimates came from our colleagues in Europe when they did a band recovery analysis of survival, and they saw that it was only 3% survival rate for these types of birds.
Wow.
But again, these things if you're doing 500,000 to 250,000 now, although I can probably show you a couple preserves that do more than that. 3% of all those birds, that's still a ton of birds moving genetics every single year. And that's why it's a trickle effect. And that's why it's sort of like, you're eating it a little bit and a little bit. You're making the population go from 9 eggs to maybe 8.75, 8.65, 8.5, 8, 7.5. This is like constantly like declining average eggs until the point where recruitment does not equal death and you've got population declines.
Yeah. Well, go ahead.
I got a question, kind of to change, but it's the same premises basically. So we've modified the mallard. And this is going to be way out here. This is some Frankenstein bullshit.
Uh-oh.
Is there not a way to take in the Smithsonian the passenger pigeon that we have? And
you're talking about Jurassic Park.
Basically, has that ever been able? Can we? Is there any way of them doing that? Taking genetics or DNA from, I guess, cloning.
Go look up. Yes, go look up Colossal and Restore and Revive. So I'm on the board of Restore and Revive, although I should probably make sure that's correct, or Revive and Restore. I should know what board I'm on.
What is it? It's Colossal.
Colossal is one of the companies.
Oh, okay.
So is this doable?
And then, what's that?
Answer.
Is it doable?
It's we're getting there. Yeah, Revive and Restore is the board that I'm on.
I mean, we don't need to bring back dinosaurs and shit, but if you could bring back, because there's more than the passenger. The Labrador duck also is extinct, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we okay. So if you go look at Colossal, they're in charge of the mammoth. So the mammoth is supposed to be coming out in 2028. They're in charge of the dodo to put back into the Mauritian Islands. And the third one, I forget what they're in charge. The company that I'm involved with is actually the passenger pigeon, the heath hen, and the thylacine.
What's the name of this place now called?
Revival.
Revive.
Yeah, I just had it.
Revive and Restore.
Reviveandrestore.org. Passenger Pigeon Project.
Yep.
So are we going to see this in our lifetime?
This is a thing. So yeah, they think so. Now, what? So the technology would be to put. So you're right. So there's enough passenger pigeons in the museums and in national museums that we actually have quite the a snapshot of a lot of their genetic diversity, and so we could take that genome and we can basically implant it. This is like the most basic explanation of this. There's a lot there, but implant it into a rock dove or a pigeon. And it will sire passenger pigeons.
So,
and so that's the idea. Now for the heath hen, it's the prairie chicken. So the heath hen was actually the eastern form of a prairie chicken, right? So their genetic differences aren't huge. There isn't a ton of them. So this seems like a thing. And the idea they've already identified, I believe, don't quote me on any of this, but is to put them back to where the last place where they were, which is Martha's Vineyard. And so that the carrier for that would be prairie chicken, but you just change the genetic code to create a heath hen. Now the Labrador duck is something I suggested. I said, look, I think the Labrador duck would be the easiest of all of this to show proof of concept. I guess they're still talking about it, maybe.
Why do you think it would be easiest?
But yeah, that'd be cool. It would be because we have very closely related species. We've got a good number of them at the Smithsonian, and we have a near complete genome. So we have all the data and the recipe to make the Labrador duck a reality, more or less.
Okay, my next question, because this is some interesting shit right here.
But hold on, this could be one of those times where we're like 50 years from now, we're like, oh shit, didn't see that outcome.
Shouldn't have done that.
Look at the mallard.
I mean, what do you think is gonna happen when we put a bunch of mammoth-looking elephants into the tundra? My hope is they actually create more duck habitat by stomping around, and they just But my thinking is this is gonna be even worse because it's just gonna be they're gonna stomp.
Yeah.
they're going to basically open up the carbon that's in the Arctic, and then they're just essentially going to increase melting, which again, good for ducks, bad probably for a lot of other species.
So do you think we're really in our lifetime, I'm 50 years old, I'm 55, in my lifetime, do you think we'll see the mammoth?
They put out a press that by, what was it, 2028 should be the first one. They have a zoo in Quebec, I forget where. And one of the things that they're interested in, why I was, approached, is a lot of our hybridization work is understanding how many generations and how many individuals do you need to move the needle back towards a parental, right? So you asked, can we move the mallard population back? That's something we're asking and something we're building tools for, to figure out how many birds do we need to take and then put wild birds in to actually move the needle in a population, the genetics of that population. So let's say you've got a 75% mammoth, 25% African elephant, which is more or less what they think is the first one going to be. How many individuals and how do you breed them to move that needle without having to change all the genetic code towards mammoth? Mm-hmm. And that's something that my team is provide that like idea or those guidances, at least, at face value. At least that's what my understanding of why they asked me to join.
I'm on colossal.com, and it says 10 core goals for reviving the mammoth. One says to decelerate melting of the Arctic permafrost, prevent the emission of greenhouse gases trapped within the permafrost layer, up to 600 million tons of net carbon annually. How is that? How is a mammoth running around going to do that?
So I guess I thought about it as differently. Maybe I should have looked into this a little bit more before I didn't think we were going to talk about mammoths.
I didn't think so either, but that's how the show goes.
So obviously somebody did some modeling and showed that their impact would actually be the reverse of what I expect.
Right. But what you expect is it would make more sense in my mind, because they're going to be stomping all this crap out of there, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I simply thought of it as a bison, and what bison did they created the prairies, right? They essentially, because of their numbers, when they would go through, they'd stomp any tree trying to come out, mm-hmm. they would destroy. Yeah. So that's how the prairies. Same thing with elephants and why the savanna is there. They essentially destroy every tree that comes out there. And what we consider an ecosystem engineer. Maybe I just don't understand what mammoths.
Well, and that's number 3. It says to revert now overshrub forest back into natural Arctic grassland.
That I totally agree with. That they will do for sure. And maybe that's the point of the carbon sequestration. Like they like stomp the plants down. I don't know. I'm not gonna. I'm not gonna.
Okay, but hold on. I'm gonna ask one more question about this. Number 7. It says it's to save the modern elephant from extinction. How is more mammoths going to have any impact on the elephant population?
I will decline to answer that question.
I can answer that. 50 years from now.
A doctor just said he's not going to answer it, and you're going to take a stab at it?
Listen, I was an amateur gynecologist in college. I'm close to a doctor. 50 years from now.
Okay.
There is going to be a gala, a big fundraiser, and Elon Musk, oldest son, is going to pay $3 billion to be the first person to shoot a mammoth to get mounted for his trophy room. People are going to quit shooting elephants, and everybody's going to go shoot mammoths.
What's that got to do? I got you. For the ivory of the mammoth.
Seriously, that is what's going to happen. There's somebody right now that's not on Earth that's going to that's going to be the next trophy. Someone's going to be like, I hope that happens before I die. I'd like to add that to my trophy room.
I mean, to be fair, I thought I could clone a velociraptor and be the first one to hunt a velociraptor, but that's not gonna happen. So in my need is like, okay, but I get the first shot at a passenger.
There you go.
This is a serious question, though, and this is a concern, or not a concern. We've been trying to save the whooping crane, and we are saving them. My whole life.
Well, and two birds a year at a time almost, or some shit like that.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, we are looking now. What is the population of whooping cranes worldwide? Is there 1,000 birds yet?
I can look it up.
This is a good, man, I should have. I don't know. I don't know, but I know that they're doing. they're a conservation success story. They went from, I mean, it's the same thing with the California condor. You know, they went from 0 in the wild to actual mating populations, right? And I think I know where you're going with this, but I'll let you
It's a
keep going.
slow crawl, is what I'm getting at.
543 whooping cranes
Worldwide. There was
543.
there was 14 in 1942 or something. I'm just saying they're not increasing very much. So the mammoth population is going to take forever. And I think that's great.
Well,
in Labrador ducks, whatever they bring back, I think that is a wonderful, wonderful. This has been is a very interesting podcast. But the whooping crane has taken a long, long time. I would have thought
that's because of their like life history traits, right? They imprint at an early age. We didn't know that was going to happen, and that if they imprint and they like are like, okay, I'm not going to migrate now, and they take I believe they become sexually mature at 3 or 4. It takes time. They only have like 3 eggs. Don't quote me on any of these things, but it's just life history. It's a hard species to work with. Same thing with the California condor. It's just, they're long-lived, slow-growing species, and they're really hard to work with. Compared to something that can spit out 8, 9 young a year within their first year, high survivability. These types of things, that's the species you want to work with. But unfortunately, the things that become extinct and are endangered are usually things that are long lived, have very few young, these types of things. And it takes a long time. It definitely does.
Mother Nature's made it hard for them. My next dumb question is, will we see ever in history all the cross, like a mallard duck will sleep with anything and breed with anything. We've got brewer's ducks. We got the hybrids. Will we ever have a different species come out from all of this eventually? Of wild ducks?
Of wild ducks? The species has to take. So to be fair, our research shows that the Hawaiian duck, which is part of the mallard group, it's part of this like 14 actual species, was a hybrid long time ago between a Laysan duck, which is the original mallard for the Hawaiian Islands, and a migrating mallard. So they hybridized, made this hybrid, and it just so happened that our timing is almost perfect with Polynesian colonization. So the Laysan duck that didn't have any predator evasion obviously went extinct. But for some reason, the Hawaiian duck, it has these like innate capacities for predator evasion, and you can even see it now. That shouldn't be there because there weren't any predators for them. And we think that the combination between a mallard and that influx of mallard genetics, that innate capacity for like, oh man, there's this thing, I should fly away, allowed them to actually survive through Polynesian colonization, and now we consider as a unique species. Another one I'll give you is a Steller's duck. We've recently published a paper that shows that a Steller's duck was probably an ancient hybridization event between a long-tailed duck and an eider ancestor. Eider and long-tail combine, and you've got a Steller's duck. And today we consider that a species. It's something like, we actually think that the Labrador duck was actually a hybrid species between, I don't know what. I forget. I'm sure some combination of sea ducks. So can a new species arise in 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 years? Potentially. I think where conservation is going, the conversation in conservation is going, is actually we can't keep saving. Yeah, I think some people are throwing up their hands saying like, we can't just save every single thing. Right. What we need to do is save the thing that fills that niche. We need a thing that does that job well, so that way we get, that void is filled in, pollination or whatever it might be. They fill that void. And this is a contentious conversation because it completely goes against conservation dogma, which is no, if it's our fault, we should try to do something. And that goes towards the conversation of hybrids. What is a hybrid? If it actually is doing better than the parentals in a changing environment, do we consider that a threat? That's all new conversation that is occurring in at least the conservation world.
We are seeing changes just in my lifetime. When I was a kid, we didn't ever have a white-winged dove. We have tons of white-winged doves we're shooting
absolutely.
now.
Yeah, those things are doing great, right? They're basically exploding from the south.
Yeah, and it's just happened in the last 20 years. Just all of a sudden, 20 years ago, we got tons of them.
Yeah, I'm happy about it because here in El Paso, I mostly hunt on the New Mexico side, but I can take you to a place, and when that light turns on, it'll look like you're in Mexico, and it's just waves and waves of white wings and mornings just coming through. I mean, you're right. I mean, you didn't see white wings.
Now, you are in El Paso. That is Mexico.
Is it?
Pretty close.
Right across the border.
Yep. Okay. The Eurasian dove is an invasive problem, and the Egyptian goose. You're starting to see more and more Egyptian geese all over the South now.
I've heard. I imagine that was some farm releases, and they're starting to take now. Something that is more naturally invading, I would say, would be the tree ducks, right? Whistling ducks,
more and more of them now.
Black-bellies and fulvous, man, they're doing great. I mean, they're doing the same thing that we're seeing white wings. They're just spreading that northward spread. I mean, there's some places in South Texas you can go and you'll see. I saw tons and tons of them. Yeah, and it's a duck that is, quote unquote naturally invading. Would they have invaded if the ecology hadn't changed? I don't know, but yeah, currently they're a species doing well.
The Labrador duck, is there any smoking gun as to why they went extinct? Was it overhunting or was it
overhunting? Yeah, their populations just weren't very large. This is why at least I hypothesized that they were actually like this like remnant hybrid population probably. Right. There weren't a ton. And they were easy. I forget where the last one was shot, but yeah, it wasn't very easy. It wasn't very hard to wipe those guys out.
And that does bring up an interesting thing because, like, animals go extinct on their own accord in nature, right? Like without any interference from humans. So it does bring up an interesting discussion, like what animals do we save and try to bring back?
Yes, and that is this, but then the reverse, would those species that we're trying to save be in decline if we weren't here? And we didn't put a major city in, that eats up all the water in Southern California and Vegas, would the changing landscape that we've created, is basically it's our fault. So what you do? Right. More or less, right? And that's a philosophical question. And that's always been a philosophical question in conservation science.
Urbanization, I mean, I've got to imagine as cities continue to expand, like the Katy Prairie, we've talked about this a lot. The Katy Prairie, like there used to be Canada geese that went down there and then snow geese. And then now it's just subdivisions and shopping malls. Like that's where their habitat went. And that's why there's no more birds that go to South Texas like they used to.
I mean, that, and I'm sure the loss of the rice fields, right? Shifting ag practices, huge component. Once those birds know where the ag changed and shifted, that's where they're going. And that's what we've always seen. Declining. And then on top of it, then the question becomes, would there be that many birds if we didn't have all those rice fields, right? So it's like it's a flip and flop. I mean, now we definitely know that, without those extra calories provided by rice fields, cornfields, all these types of agricultural practices, we probably couldn't sustain our populations at levels that we have because they're providing the fuel that is required to go back in good body condition to spring grounds and breed properly, right? So it's this interesting intertwine of, like you created a problem because of the human dominant landscape, but then sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, and depending on the species, right? Like the rice fields are probably really great for ducks, but then we probably wiped out some crayfish or something else that used to be there, right? For sure, bunnies that used to be there. So I mean, once you put people on the landscape, everything turns into an imbalance. Then it's like constant like balancing act. Oh no, we need wolves because the elk are eating themselves out of house and home. But now the wolves are doing so well that it tipped it tipped the balance even further because there were all these elk. So then the wolves did so great, and now they're starving, and the elk are doing poorly. So it's this constant like back and forth. I mean, even orcas, right? So we love orcas, but now there are these pods of orcas in Puget Sound around in Washington that have become non-migratory, specific to those locations, eating themselves out of house and home to the point where like, people are even questioning, well, now do we shoot some of these orcas because they're now like eating all the salmon that other species are requiring, and all these other things are falling apart because these things are so smart. The orcas there like remind me of people because it's like essentially a gang, and they have their own type of, if you ever look this up, it's fascinating. They have their own type of lingo, but they also know the lingo of the orcas that swim outside of the bay. And there'll be like one or two of them that go outside of the bay, talk the lingo of those guys and tell them, hey guys, come over. And then they'll bring them into a location where they can't get away, and the rest of the pod comes out of the depth and they kill them all.
No way.
It's amazing.
What the hell? So they're tricking these dumb deep ocean orcas into coming here, and then they're ganging up on them.
They're like quote unquote the nicer orcas, although they like to kill whale calves for shits and giggles, I guess you could say too. But I mean, yeah. So they're all. I mean, that's just life, right? Everybody's just like. Again, it's all balances, right? We tip the balance towards one or the other species, and we're constantly correcting.
We're always going to do that though, because any human involvement, just like the wolves, for example, like we need more wolves because the elk are starving. It's like no shit, like we put too many wolves out there.
We should have shot more elk.
They're doing too good. But it's just we're constantly going to be readjusting 2 to 3 years into the future.
I don't know anybody that's got it. That I did not know one advantage this wolf deal has helped anywhere.
It made bigger elk, didn't it?
We should have shot more elk is what we should have done. Minnesota, you can't find a deer in the northern part of Minnesota hardly anymore because the wolves are going crazy eating everything. And then the liberal laws, they don't want you shooting other wolves.
Yeah, I mean, it's all balancing act. You need to have predators on the landscape if you want a balanced ecosystem. But then with us there, and especially with a lot of times that laws are being carried by feelings rather than science, it's hard. And things become even further unbalanced, and then you've got to, sometimes pay sharpshooters. There's lots of different things. Then we have to take taxpayer dollars and do vasectomies, or I don't know what we're doing these days. But it's a constant battle.
Right now, the coon debate is the thing. The raccoon debate is the huge thing right now. Are they
how
many turkeys they kill and everything?
Nest raiders.
Yeah, well, and because there's no fur market no more.
There's no fur market. Yeah, and I mean raccoons are also havoc on our ducks, right? Mm-hmm. Foxes, raccoons, and the only reason that's a thing because we wiped out all the apex predators that used to keep those things in line. Right. So you take out wolves and grizzlies from the prairies where they once were, and you've got a boon of your beta predators, which are foxes, coyotes, raccoons, minks, all these types of things. And then that means their primary prey, which will be more ducks and other smaller mammals, are being preyed upon at a higher rate than naturally occurring. And so this constant back and forth.
What is the world duck population right now?
The world duck?
Or let's say North America. North American duck population right now.
What was the last beep up? Were we like 48 million? 50, something like that.
Estimated 34.2.
34.2 million ducks.
12% lower than 2019's estimate of right around 40 million.
What at the
that's what I
during the Indian days. or Native Americans, whatever we call them nowadays.
Native American
on
days.
Native American days, what was the duck population then? Do they think it wasn't as high as it is now?
There's no way of knowing.
Well, they can do studies on everything.
Yeah,
They're bringing a mammoth back.
I mean, I imagine it would have been close into the hundreds of millions.
Oh, so it was that much more then.
Else. I would imagine. I think, like, for some reason, 150 million is popping in my head, but I could be completely wrong.
Well, the reason why I asked was because then everything ran rampant and controlled itself. Coons, bears, whatever it was. And so I didn't know if maybe we have imbalanced nature, because the white-tailed deer population is higher now than it ever has been in the history of mankind, I would bet you.
Also imbalanced.
That's right. It's very imbalanced.
But is that because of the way is that because of good farming practices and habitat so much more conducive
there's no predators.
There's no predators.
It's selection for whitetail, because you've got ag practices that favor whitetails. They used to compete with elk, right? Elk were around all over the part, all the way to Maine. And so they used to compete with elk. They used to have predators, not only mountain lions, wolves, brown or grizzly bears and black bears. They just don't have them anymore, right? Mm-hmm. And so with ag practices that give them calories that make their home ranges so much smaller, they don't have to move that far, right? It was favorable. It's favorable for whitetails, and they boomed, just like putting wood duck boxes out provided that favorable connection that allowed our wood ducks to come back. That's the basic story of it, for sure.
The deer population is, and we're not a deer podcast by any means, but in front of our lodge, we have 25 acres our lodge sits on, and two winters ago, we fed 100 deer on 25.
Now you're genetically modifying deer, Jeff. You're screwing up. But you're making it too easy for them.
We would feed our road every day, and we would have 100 deer. There's a pivot circle on 1,000 acres behind us, and it's probably 200 acres under pivot. There's 500 deer. There were 600 deer feeding within a half a mile of the lodge every single day, and it looked just like if you were in the Rocky Mountains and you saw the elk around Yellowstone on the wheat fields around there. It was crazy. But those numbers are out of balance compared to what they should be. That's why I asked about the ducks, because have we created more habitat and wetlands for them? That's why I wondered if the duck numbers
way more.
So basically the duck numbers are off compared to what they used to be. That was my question, I guess.
Absolutely. They're definitely off of what they used to be, but they're still. The only reason that they're at the numbers that they are is because of Ducks Unlimited and Delta. That buying, like, if you look at any other bird species, they're all declining. They're all declining except for waterfowl, and that has highlighted the resiliency of a species as long as they've got habitat.
Yeah, hunters are the best.
And that really highlights But the problem is we can only control so much of it, right? Think about what the prairie potholes were before farming. Mm-hmm. Think of what that could hold, right? What we could hold now looks like 35, 40 million birds, as long as we've got a good water on the landscape. Like you said, this year's hopefully will be a boon, and we'll climb back to closer to 40. We don't know. But that's exactly it. The habitat's there. We wipe that habitat out and our numbers will decline 100%.
But we also have created a ton of food sources for them that they didn't have before.
All the way down. Correct. Yeah. So if there wasn't all of the ag lands for all the stopovers, allowing them to keep feeding, absolutely. Absolutely. And it goes back to the deer, like there wouldn't be corn, right? They'd just be eating browse. How many deer in that exact same location, if you just had a pure forest, no extra calories, how many deer can that support compared to wipe it out, clear the forest and put a cornfield out? Completely different numbers.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to start wrapping up here because I know you got to teach a class here in like 20 minutes.
Oh, I would love to take your class.
Yeah, fascinating. Just enroll at UTEP, Jeff, and you can take it. Is there a way, do we have any way of bringing, you said you want to bring the Velociraptor back. Is that a possibility at all? No? That the DNA is not viable anymore? Is that why?
There's no reason to.
No, it's just not. No, so all dinosaur bones are fossiled. That means all organic material is gone.
Right.
It's rock, essentially.
It's done.
It's done. There is no more DNA.
So we need to find a mosquito like Jurassic Park.
We need to find those. We need to find that mosquito that drank the blood, that went into the amber, and then somehow the DNA still survives 65 million years, and we could extract that. Yeah.
Okay.
If we could do that, it's possible, but I'm pretty sure it's not.
So here's my next question. How do we, because correct me if I'm wrong, carbon dating is not, it's only good for, what is it, like 50,000 years to have an accurate representation? How do we date something that's 65 million years old?
We know it's rock formation. So like you'd have to talk to geologists, but the world layers just like a tree.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can see where the bone is compared to that layer, right?
Right.
So you can see, and the timing of that layer, essentially, and that's that more or less. But that being said, carbon dating, and not just carbon, but hydrogen dating, other types of isotopes allow us to go further back in time. I can't tell you how far we can go back in time. Right. That's not what I do. Don't know how they do it. But in essence, we are going further back. But to go that far back, it's basically looking at it at tree rings, and you can just count the dates,
right,
and go back in time.
It's fascinating stuff. And then I wonder, how the hell did they even find the first dinosaur? Just excavating, maybe?
Well, probably in Alaska, they just fall them off they go down when it rains a lot. They just see them along the river. Right. The mammoths.
Well, those are mammoths.
Yeah, mammoths. Excuse me. Yes, they find dinosaurs in Baylor County.
Listen,
dinosaurs. I mean, excavating. Once the first person, or I'm probably a pharaoh or somebody, found a dinosaur. They understood that there are these massive things that once existed, and I'm sure every pharaoh wants a dinosaur.
Yeah, who wouldn't? Right?
So they dug, right, and they did what we do, but then the science became like an actual thing, paleontology, and people understood how to dig.
Last question from me: the woolly mammoth, the current elephant that we see now, is that a direct descendant from the woolly mammoth? Did they cross? So it's two separate lineages, but they're very closely related. So just by looking at the genome, they're exactly 1 million, more or less 1 million base pairs apart. So that's actually not that much. So it's more or less as Colossal, as some folks at Colossal explained to me. Essentially, what we need to do is make a hairy elephant and change its thermodynamics towards colder climates.
Mm-hmm. What's the size differences? Was a woolly mammoth a lot bigger than the regular?
It was bigger, but I can't tell you by how much. So that's what I mean. It'll probably be it won't be as big, probably, but it'll be like a hairy, version that can withstand cold climates.
So the woolly mammoth went south and shed its hair because it didn't need the fur anymore.
No, you could think of it as two different lineages, and one stayed south and the other one went north, and essentially turned into this thing.
That makes sense. That makes more sense.
And same thing. There's another split for mastodon, right? It's a completely different woolly elephant-like thing.
What class do you teach at UTEP? Which classes? What are the name of your classes?
Right now I'm actually teaching birds and mammals. We have this conglomerate. I'm about to go teach mammalogy. Why am I teaching mammalogy?
Can you
because you have nobody else. It's mostly just pictures of me with deer. No. I teach birds and mammals. I teach waterfowl ecology. If you actually want to take my class, we are starting a brand new thing. It's going to be online for anybody. It's waterfowl ecology and management. The latest and greatest of all waterfowl is going to come out in fall 24 through our online version. So this is the first time I'm ever talking about it, but I'm going to start to really showcase it. Hopefully we'll get a boon turnout. So everybody that's listening, if you really want to dive deep, we provide a certificate, especially if you're fish and wildlife state agencies. This certificate might help you progress in your field. But I teach that, and then I teach population genetics.
I'm going to take your waterfowl class.
Yeah.
I would really enjoy it. I've been wanting to go back to school anyways and take a couple of classes. And
whenever this class gets a little bit closer to releasing, let's get you back on and we'll kind of talk about it and go down.
That would be
go
phenomenal,
down some more rabbit holes with
we
you.
We hope to do fall 23, right? That's going to be our inaugural come out. So I'm sure there'll be lots of like glitches and stuff, but hopefully we can showcase that this is a thing that is interested and wanted. We're going to be I'm going to be co-instructing with Dr. Rick Kaminsky, who's been in the field for decades. You know, he's one of our forefathers, more or less. And so we're going to kind of get this thing off the ground, and hopefully we have a good turnout, and hopefully this becomes a thing, and we can provide the same level of teaching and knowledge, kind of standardize it the way we teach waterfowl ecology, you know, for anybody around the country and other countries. We hope this becomes a good resource.
Dr. Phil, I have really this has been a very enjoyable podcast, and thank you for keeping it dummied down so two idiots like us could understand what you're talking about.
Yeah,
really enjoyed it.
I appreciate.
Yeah, we'll get you.
I didn't expect go towards mammoths and passenger pigeons, so I'm sorry if I lacked a bit of knowledge, but hopefully that was entertaining. Regardless,
really enjoyed it.
We are not a normal waterfowl podcast. I think that's why our numbers are so big, because we talk about mammoths.
And I didn't, like I said, like I kind of had an overview of where I wanted it to go, but like the rabbit holes are what makes conversations fun, right? So.
Absolutely. Soon we'll have a duck mammoth.
Hybrid,
yes. You know?
Now we're talking.
I'm going to put mallard genes into this mammoth. I bet that's going to.
Mallards put his genes everywhere, anyways.
Could you imagine a woolly mammoth flying?
That's a slut of ducks, so he'll go anywhere.
Yeah. Well.
I'm gonna make a mammoth.
There you go. That's your life mission now. So anything less than that's a failure. It's been a pleasure, Dr. Phil. We'll get you on again later this summer whenever your course is getting ready to release, and do this all over again.
You so much.
Perfect.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good day, and God bless you, my friend.
Bye.
You two guys have a good one.
Very interesting guy. You did a good job.
That's right. Didn't expect. I'm kind of like him. Mammoths and mastodon were not on the agenda.
No, but I learned
until
a lot
they became.
Today. I'm going to take that class.
Until they became the agenda.
Anything that
Jeff, you can take it this fall.
I'm going to. Stuff like that interests me.
It is, yeah. It's really cool.
I wish now when I was younger I would have taken a lot more stuff like that.
Wouldn't have.
And actually paid attention in school instead of just trying to go to find out somebody's phone number and where the parties were going to be.
Right. So, anyway. A lot of fun. We hope that you enjoyed it, and we hope that everybody has a wonderful weekend.
Come out to when's this one coming out? Monday?
Yeah, I screwed that up. So don't have a wonderful, because we're leaving for our first leg of On the Road with Boss, hosted by Jeff and Andy. We leave tomorrow for
we
Michigan.
could call it Andy and Jeff. I don't care.
Michigan and Tennessee. So yeah, we're doing this ahead of time. So yes, I misspoke. Have a great week.
So is this what's coming out tomorrow?
I don't know. But just have a great week.
Okay.
And we'll see you at Ducks May 5th, 6th, and 7th.
That's what I was going to tell you. Come to Ducks May 5th, 6th, and 7th. Go by and see all of our good sponsors. We'll be there. Look forward to seeing you. We'll have the whole family's going to be with us.
Yep.
So look forward to seeing y'all at Texas Motor Speedway May 5th, 6th, and 7th. Hope everyone's having a very, very safe and good turkey season. I've seen a lot of guys are struggling this spring.
I've seen some guys got shot.
Huh? No shit. Where at?
I can't remember.
Was it bad?
Have to go look.
Like kill somebody or just hurt bad?
Just the guy was reaping with a fan, and
how the fuck does someone not? I just don't.
Public land, Jeff. You shouldn't reap on public land.
That probably is true too. But if you see a 180-pound turkey, that's not a turkey.
They can't see anything.
What do you mean they can't see anything?
I don't know, Jeff. I don't know how people get excited.
You
Jeff.
don't think you're looking? That looked a little big.
I see a fan, but I don't see a head.
I mean, yeah, they just don't. Wow, that's sad. That's horrible. I feel bad for the guys. God almighty. I hope that everything worked out okay for them. All right. Thank y'all for listening to us. God bless y'all, and have a great week or weekend whenever this is coming out. Peace.
Check out all of our great sponsors. Go check out Mossberg, Dive Bomb Industries, Boss Shot Shells, Pacific Calls, Gundog Outdoors, Shin Gear, Lucky Duck, Looking Glass Podcast, Alpha Outdoor Specialties, Stanfield Hunting Outfitters, Dirty Duck Coffee, Ducks Unlimited, and Double T British Chemists.